They never saw it coming, not the way their bones would rattle, not the marching echo in that alley, and definitely not the man they thought was too old to matter. "Out of the way, Fossil," one of the cocky teens barked, shoulder-checking 91-year-old Walter Kane straight into oncoming traffic. Tires screeched. Horns blared. Walter, battle-scarred veteran of 3 brutal conflicts, steered on the edge of death for a heartbeat, then regained his footing, not with panic, with pure, uncut rage. Cold, quiet, simmering fury. The teenagers cackled, slapping palms and strutting off like kings of the sidewalk. 20 minutes later, still buzzing with their hollow bravado in a graffiti-tagged alley nearby, the narrow entrance behind them suddenly darkened. 2 figures in immaculate military dress blues stepped into view, boots hitting concrete in perfect, echoing unison like thunder chasing lightning. If you believe respect for elders, especially warriors who've bled for their country, is sacred, type honor below. Walter Kane had seen more than 9 decades, and he hadn't wasted a single one. At 15, he doctored his papers to join the fight in World War II. He survived Okinawa, stayed in uniform through the bone-cracking cold of Korea, and later, the jungles of Vietnam. He'd finally hung up his rifle after 30 years, retiring as a sergeant major in the United States Army. His modest apartment was a museum of unspoken stories, dusty medals, sepia-toned photos of brothers lost and won, folded flags, and a hand-carved cane passed down from a comrade who never made it home. Walter never wore his ribbons. Didn't need to. They weren't for show, they were for remembrance. His body now moved with the stiffness of age, but in his eyes still burned the steady, defiant fire of a man who'd stared death down and made it blink first. Walter didn't ask for parades, didn't expect salutes. He just wanted to walk in peace, to visit the park, the library, the bakery on Thursdays, for his one sweet indulgence, a flaky apricot Danish. But that afternoon, halfway to the bakery, he came face to face with a familiar nuisance, a gang of 5 teens, always milling around, always loud, always looking for trouble. They weren't strangers. Walter had seen them loiter, break things, taunt passers-by. Usually, he gave them a wide berth, not out of fear, just to avoid wasting breath on fools. But this time, they were stretched across the narrow sidewalk like they owned it, legs sprawled, forcing pedestrians to sidestep into the muck of the gutter. Walter approached, calm but deliberate. "Pardon me, gentlemen," he said with the gravelly dignity of someone who'd spoken commands in war zones. "Could I trouble you to let an old soldier pass?" The tallest among them, a lanky kid in a neon hoodie and sideways cap, looked Walter over with a sneer that dripped mockery. "Old soldier?" he scoffed. "What are you, 110? His friends howled with laughter. "Just trying to reach the bakery," Walter replied, eyes steady, one hand resting casually on the top of his cane. "If it's not too much to ask." The tall teen repeated the word with a snort. "Ask? Nah, I think we've got a problem with that, Grandpa." He stretched his legs even farther across the path, his sneakers almost touching Walter's boots. "This is our bench. Go find another sidewalk." Another teen chimed in with a smirk. "Yeah, maybe go home and watch some black and white reruns, Pops. Don't want to break a hip out here." Walter felt it stir the old pulse of discipline, the combat-trained patience. His voice stayed calm, but had an edge now. "There's no need for disrespect, son. Just asking for a little human decency." The leader laughed, then stood towering over the old man like he'd already won. "Decency? You first, Granddad. You want manners? Maybe you should learn how to move on. Show some respect to your betters." The teen smirked, then did something so pointlessly cruel it would have made the devil wince. As Walter Kane tried to edge past him, the teen slid out his foot and, with a perfectly timed shove to Walter's shoulder, sent the elderly man flailing. "Watch it, mummy bones," he barked. Walter's cane flew from his grip as his frail balance snapped. He staggered off the high curb and crashed awkwardly, thankfully, upright into the chaos of oncoming traffic. Horns screamed. Tires squealed. A sedan veered sharply, missing him by inches. Walter's heart thundered in his chest, not from fear, but adrenaline. His instincts, buried under years of peace, snapped awake. He lunged for the curb, his old reflexes still shockingly intact. Behind him, The gang erupted in laughter, one of them clutching his stomach. "Look at him dance," one hooted. "Bet they taught that in boot camp back in the dinosaur days." They burst into another round of high fives, completely unfazed by the near-death moment they'd caused. As passing pedestrians stopped, throwing disgusted looks their way, the boys casually wandered down a side alley, still laughing, still kings of their little concrete kingdom. Walter stood trembling at the edge of the street, breath ragged. A middle-aged woman hurried over, eyes wide with concern. She bent down, retrieving his cane and gently pressing it into his hands. "Are you all right?" she asked, scandalized. "Those awful boys, did they hurt you, dear?" Walter gave her a shaky smile, brushing the grit off his coat. His hip throbbed from the impact, and his pride had taken a brutal beating, but he managed to steady his voice. "Just rattled, ma'am. Thank you kindly." His hands trembled as he straightened. That moment hadn't just bruised his body, it carved a deep mark inside. He'd been shot at, shelled, hunted, and even enemy soldiers had shown more honor than what he'd just endured. He heard their laughter fading down the alley, and something in him twisted. His craving for that apricot Danish vanished completely. He just wanted to go home. But his legs wouldn't turn. Not yet. It wasn't just the pain in his side that held him, it was something deeper, older, a code etched in blood and discipline. He was Army. Army didn't walk away from ambushes, not without answering. He wasn't going to confront those boys. Not directly. Those days were over. But retaliation? That had more than one form. Walter knew this neighborhood better than any of those punks. He knew that alley was a dead end, boxed in behind a collapsed warehouse. And more importantly, he knew something else. The Army recruiting office was only 2 blocks away. And the sergeant who ran it, Staff Sergeant Maddox, was a lean, mean, regulation-obsessed pitbull with a known soft spot for old-timers who'd served in the big ones. Walter had met him once at a vet memorial service. The guy saluted like he was punching God in the chest. Walter pulled out his battered flip phone, more plastic than processor. He didn't have Maddox's direct line, but he had the front desk. That was enough. His fingers hovered for a moment, then punched the number in cleanly. His breath was steady now. Cold determination settled like steel behind his ribs. "United States Army Recruiting, Sergeant Griffin speaking." Walter spoke calmly, voice low but firm. "Sergeant, this is Sergeant Major Walter Kane, retired. I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Maddox. This is about an incident involving severe disrespect to the uniform and an assault on a veteran." There was a beat of silence. Then the voice on the other end shifted, crisper, alert. "Understood, Sergeant Major. Connecting you now. Please hold one moment." There was a quiet click. Then a gruff voice rolled over the line like gravel over steel. "Maddox, who is this?" "Staff Sergeant," Walter said, his tone flat and resolute. "It's Kane. Walter Kane. Sergeant Major, retired. We've got a situation that needs boot sand. It needs 'em now." "Sergeant Major Kane, sir. What can I do for you?" The respect in Maddox's voice was immediate and total, cutting through the line like a salute in word form. Walter wasted no time. Calm, precise, and without a hint of embellishment, he laid out exactly what had just unfolded. The sidewalk blockade, the taunts, the calculated shove into moving traffic, and the group of teens now holed up at the dead end behind the old warehouse. He wasn't asking for revenge. He didn't need pity. He spoke the truth, plain and sharp. "They mocked the service," Walter concluded quietly, "and they shoved one of its own into danger for a laugh." There was a moment of silence, heavy and cold. Then Maddox spoke again, his voice like frost sliding over steel. "Sergeant Major, were you hurt?" "Bruised, rattled, still standing," Walter replied. "Location confirmed behind the warehouse off 5th and Langdon?" "Exactly. Group of 5, maybe 6. Teenagers. Mid-teens, best guess." "Understood. Consider it handled, Sergeant Major," Maddox said, his words now laced with a simmering fury Walter hadn't heard in a long time. "Stay clear of that alley. We'll educate them, Army style." The line clicked dead. Walter knew what that meant. Army-style counseling was not gentle. It was exacting, swift, professional, and very, very effective, especially in the hands of a fired-up sergeant and a crew of recruits hungry to serve something bigger than themselves. Walter found a bench across the street, angled perfectly toward the alley's mouth. He sat. He waited. He didn't wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, the street was no longer quiet. It buzzed not with noise, but with presence. They didn't run, they didn't yell, they moved. 8 soldiers approached like a wave of discipline, a mix of fully uniformed recruiters and greenhorns prepping for basic. Maddox walked in front, lean and coiled like a spring that hadn't unspooled in a decade. They wore their uniforms like armor, some in starched service khakis, others in utilities still creased from the lockers. They weren't just moving fast, they moved with purpose, the kind of movement that sucked all the swagger out of the air and left only silence in its wake. No commands were barked. No sound broke the stillness, but the dull thud of synchronized boots. At the mouth of the alley, Maddox raised a gloved hand. Instantly, 2 soldiers split off to flank the entrance, blocking it like immovable statues. Their faces were locked in stone. Not a word. Not a blink. Authority radiated from them like a furnace. No mall cop, no city officer could mimic that kind of presence. The remaining 6, led by Maddox, turned and vanished into the shadowed alley. Walter leaned slightly forward on the bench. He couldn't see inside, but he could hear. The teen's laughter, the loud, obnoxious bravado from earlier, was cut off instantly. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It was surgical, cold. You could hear the shift from dominance to disbelief in one frozen breath. Then Maddox's voice rang out, not yelling, but crisp, deliberate, and razor-edged. Walter couldn't catch the full words, but he recognized the tone. It was the tone of a drill sergeant disciplining a recruit who just embarrassed the unit. It was the sound of promises of push-ups, of wake-up calls at 0400, of lessons in humility written on sweat and regret. No punches, no kicks, no threats, just verbal steel wrapped in army regulation and decades of tradition. After 5 or 6 long minutes, Maddox's voice finally ceased. Another soldier began speaking, firm but slower, now explaining things. Lessons, maybe. Warnings. A few words about respect. About what veterans meant to this country. About how not every man walking with a cane is weak. And then out they came. One by one, the teens stumbled from the alley. The change was striking. Gone were the cocky grins and lazy struts. Their faces were pale, some ghost white. One of them looked like he'd been holding his breath for 5 straight minutes. They looked like they were walking away from an exorcism. Not a trace of swagger remained. Their cocky arrogance had been crushed, replaced with wide-eyed, breathless shock, the kind you don't fake. They didn't bolt. They crept, inching past the alley mouth like stray dogs caught in a thunderstorm, eyes glued to the pavement, shoulders tight, glancing behind them as if they expected judgment itself to descend from the rooftops. Then came Staff Sergeant Maddox and his soldiers. They stepped from the shadows with the same silent authority they'd entered with. No smirks, no fanfare. Just steel in their expressions, and a subtle flicker of grim satisfaction. Maddox spotted Walter Kane still sitting on the bench across the street. He crossed over briskly and snapped into a razor-sharp salute. "Sergeant Major Kane, sir. Situation has been resolved." His voice was clipped, formal, brimming with military pride. "Those boys have received a comprehensive crash course in Army. Values, respect, discipline, duty. Special attention paid to honoring elders and those who served." Walter rose slowly, but with a steadiness that surprised even him. He returned the salute, his palm clean and firm in the air. "Thank you, Sergeant, and thank your men for me." "No thanks necessary, sir," Maddox replied, his eyes still sharp. "We protect our own, always, and we don't let disrespect slide, especially when it stains the uniform or the legacy behind it." He paused for a breath, then added with genuine concern, "You sure you're okay, Sergeant Major? Need a ride? A medic?" Walter shook his head, and for the first time that day, a smile crept across his face, soft but genuine. "No, Maddox. What you and your team gave me, and that was better than any prescription." Maddox gave a final nod and turned to his soldiers. All right, warriors, fall in. Back to base. Outstanding work. In perfect synchronization, the team formed ranks, pivoted on command, and marched out of view, silent, sharp, and unmistakably proud. Their presence vanished down the block, but they left the street changed, quieter, heavier, better. Walter watched them go, a new kind of warmth swelling in his chest. It wasn't weather, it was respect, real respect. Not the polite, hollow kind people tossed to the elderly, but the kind reserved for brothers in arms, for someone who'd earned it. For the first time in hours, he felt like more than just an old man walking with a cane. He felt like a soldier again. Maybe he'd go back for that Danish after all. Word of what happened in the alley spread like wildfire. Within a week, the story turned into urban legend in the neighborhood, whispered behind counters, muttered at bus stops. No one knew exactly what had been said in that alley, but whatever it was, it worked. The once defiant group of teens became unexpectedly polite, nodding to strangers, stepping off sidewalks for elders, and reportedly developing a sudden deep admiration for military patches. Walter continued his daily walks, and now, whenever he passed the Army recruiting office, he received a salute without fail from whoever stood guard. There was always a silent exchange, a nod, a glance, a small spark of mutual understanding. Because the spirit of the Army doesn't rust with age, it doesn't fade with time or injury, it endures. And when one of its own is disrespected even by punks in a forgotten alley, the response is swift, it is firm, and it is unforgettable. Some lines you just don't cross. Ever. Semper Vigilans. Subscribe if you believe the bond between those who served is unbreakable and that respect for our veterans isn't optional, it's sacred.